we are doing Act 47. Okay.
We might as well. And
Well, they have met. I talked to Richard, and unfortunately, it was an organizational meeting. He said that they really didn't talk about anything.
see, they voted. Coach wanted to be vice chair. They voted.
Yeah,
Out.
yeah. Kutz almost got it.
Well,
They have
4-3.
Fiore.
Fiore and Hippo. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Plain Speaking, the voice of the Democratic Party. Welcome. It's a sultry day here in Altoona, but that does not diminish our desire to make sure that the Democratic Party prevails, because we are the party of the people. Welcome to Plain Speaking, and we have some of our usual panelists. To my left, George Thompson, our treasurer and our resident historian, researcher, and purveyor of all kind of information.
Morning, Frank.
Good morning, George. And to my right is Robin Aurandt, who happens to be the vice chair for the 80th district and also a state committee person. Welcome, Robin. Okay, we have a lot of topics to talk about today, and I think that one that is of great import for the viewers, particularly the Altoona viewers, is the Act 47 Commission. As many of you know, Act 47 was a state law that permits third-class cities to go into receivership or pre-bankruptcy proceedings in order not to be taken over by the government because they can't manage their own affairs. And one of the precursors to that whole idea was to decide whether or not the existing form of government or some other form of government would be sufficient or reasonable to get Altoona back on the track to solvency and self-governance. And George, I know you've done a lot of reading about this. I mean, the commission had one meeting already, and I think maybe the viewers would like to know to what extent is the authority or the agenda for this commission. What is it they're supposed to do in the final analysis?
Well, the idea here is the Act 47 state contract has come in. They've given their recommendations on what the city should do to try to balance the budget more for the future, but I believe actually this year's budget is out of balance, although when you actually pull up the budgets for the city of Altoona, they have everything balanced even for next year, and I'm not totally clear how they did that, but it's supposed to be
voodoo economics.
Yeah, right. It's supposed to. Well, I think what the answer was, they had to by law balance the budget, and so they've just sort of fudged the thing to actually balance, assuming a whole bunch of layoffs.
Yeah.
And now that is the objective, not to lay a lot of staff off, but to come up with some other mechanism to continue services, not drastically reduce staff. And some of the Act 47 Commission ideas are increased taxes for, let's say, out of the city of Altoona employees.
And raise fees and stuff like that.
Things like that. They've the Act 47 Commission has speculated that perhaps the city can start taxing charitable organizations, and which, by the way, is is more than just churches. I know
it's all agencies that are.
I saw the mayoral debate or presentation of the candidates on one public access channel, and the Republican mayoral candidate suggested that maybe we'll have to start taxing churches. But let me just say that the biggie, actually, for nonprofit is Altoona Regional
Hospital. Yeah.
Hospital. That's non-taxed. All the Ida Towers, for example, I believe they're untaxed.
Yeah, because they're governmental buildings.
And in fact, the Act 47 Commission specifically mentioned the one public housing, or I shouldn't refer to it as public housing, but subsidized rent type of structure. They've specifically said that they used to tax them, and they've sort of waived it. In other words, some of the organizations can voluntarily pay money to the government, to the city of Altoona, even though legally they don't need to. In other words, it's in lieu of taxes. They just make a voluntary payment.
They've been doing that to Altoona School District and other districts. Yeah. Well, so bottom line is, though, what actually is this committee that was elected, the 7 people, what is it they're going to do? I mean, are they going to be focused on every area of the city's problems, or are they just there to decide whether we should go to a different form of government?
As far as I can tell, it's open-ended what they can do. I mean, I think the general idea is to get away from people from Harrisburg. In other words, this current Act 47 group that has come in. It's a contract, actually.
Yeah, I know.
These are...
That's, like you said, a 167-page document that outlines everything. But I'm just wondering, how can that commission, in 9 months, address every single one of those issues?
I don't think they're going to do it within 9 months. In fact, I'm not clear what the timetable is.
Yeah,
the only thing I can say, I had talked to one of our people, Richard Florin, and asked him, well, what happened? They had an initial meeting, and he said it was basically organizational. They didn't exactly talk about steps they're going to take, what areas they're going to look at. The assumption is they're going to look at everything.
Well,
what is their term? How long is their term? How long are they elected for?
I think some of the term is going to depend on the speed of their progress. I mean, in the end, they may conclude that nothing will change. I mean, that's one of the possibilities.
Well, see, that's the thing. I would like to see an agenda someday where they come out and say, here are the things we're going to be discussing. Because I know they're going to be transparent, they say. Every meeting is going to be public. No private meetings. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens. And I see I made a very tremendous boo-boo in one of the final members of our panelists here, and if it won't upset the operation here, we'll seat him immediately. Tom Patterson is with us. Is Tom here? Have him come over to sit down over here, Tom. And I erred in my initial contact with Tom. I inadvertently put down 9:45, and I meant 8:45. So welcome, Tom Patterson. We're happy to have you today.
Good morning.
We're talking about the committee that was elected by the voters of Altoona to discuss the future of the city and all that. We're trying to get some handle on what it is they're going to be doing. Now, they had their first meeting in which they named Mary Hippo the chair, and Michael Fiore, is it Michael?
Yes.
As the vice chair, but they didn't do much else as far as functional outline of what they're going to be doing. So we were wondering how much of that Act 47 Commission report of some 167 pages are they going to tackle?
Yeah.
So we don't really know, and we're waiting to hear that.
Well, I'm even puzzled. They've put out information on that 168 report. Some of the suggestions are increased payroll taxes, earned income taxes. And I'm looking at the budget for next year, and I don't actually see the budget reflecting any of the things that were... Yeah, right. So it's very hard for me to understand what's really going on. I mean, I read the report, and not that I've memorized everything that they said,
it's pretty hard to, yeah.
But you have some obvious things that can be done, and as far as I know, they have the authority to say this, that you can increase the earned income tax. Right. But I don't think it's actually been done yet.
No, it has not. No, because I think it has to come out. It has to be in some way related, as I understand it, to the actual recommendations, and it has to be acted upon then. Council has to act on it. I don't think this commission has the authority to say, and I think the council has to approve what they do. I mean, that's my understanding. Maybe we're going to have somebody who's on that council now.
Yes, at some point.
Maybe Mary Hippo or somebody to come in.
Richard.
Or Richard Florin, who's one of our Democratic committee members on that. But anyway,
could shed a
since
lot
we
more
don't
light
have a
on
lot of information, I think we probably better move on to something we do know something about. And I think we're going to take a quick look at also the second issue that is of great import to the citizens of Blair County, and that is the merger of UPMC and the Altoona Regional Health System. And for many of you who are viewing, I think you heard a lot about this. The biggest bugaboo in the whole process right now is for those of us who have Highmark coverage, have been told that we will cease being accepted by UPMC totally as of July 1 of 2014. So the big issue that SEIU, the union that represents the hospital folks, the big issue they're fighting is that they want to extend an agreement with UPMC to cover Blair and Bedford counties, people who have Highmark beyond that date. And I have not heard anything other from UPMC other than saying they'll address that issue. Tom, have you heard anything else that we've...
No, I have Highmark myself.
Yeah.
And I contacted my own carrier, and I explained the situation. I said, what's going to happen after 2014?
What'd they say?
And their answer was, well, we're working on it.
Okay. See, because what that means for those of us who have Highmark, if we need a service beyond what our Highmark says, and UPMC has the same benefit after July 1 of 2014, if we may have to pay more.
Oh, right. You'll pay out of
what do they call it? Out of
network.
And that's a big issue. So I don't know where do we stand on that now. Do we have any idea?
Well, they have exempted UPMC Bedford. In other words, it's, I guess, really optional as far as Highmark, whether they're going to include, you know, some of the healthcare organizations when there is no other resource for the people. I mean, which is really sort of the situation here in Altoona. I mean, for so many procedures, you can't go to Nason Hospital, you can't go to Tyrone. They don't offer all of the services that Altoona Regional Hospital does. So you're sort of stuck, in a sense, to either go to Pittsburgh, and to UPMC Hospital in Pittsburgh, which is obviously inconvenient for all sorts of situations.
Or like Johns Hopkins, you know.
Well, right, but that means out of network.
What about Danville? Well,
no, they're Geisinger.
Yeah, they're
That's
Geisinger. Well, actually, that's one of the things I wanted to say. You know, they had this glowing article in the Altoona Mirror about the merger of UPMC with Hammond Hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then the CEO of Altoona Regional came out with a statement saying that they've considered all of the options and they have decided UPMC is a world-class health organization, which I think it is, you know, and they're going to go with them.
I think they were like the 16th best hospital in the nation.
Yeah, so UPMC is a good organization, but missing in all these statements is what happened to, let's say, Geisinger. Geisinger at one point was trying to move into this area, and it's all silent. You know, no conversation that I'm aware of about why Altoona Regional decided to go with UPMC rather than Geisinger. I noticed that Lewistown Hospital has merged with the Geisinger system.
But isn't that a moot question now because they've already made the decision here?
Well, it's a moot question, but it speaks to the transparency of the Altoona Regional. They're acting like they made the obvious choice, and they have released no information on what criteria they were using to choose UPMC. So to me, there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, talk about the lack of transparency. Everyone keeps arguing about government being transparent. I mean, here's a major decision made by a health organization, which is really... Well, sure, it impacts all sorts of people.
What would you say to the viewers? What could they do in order to try to get some sort of relief for us folks in Highmark?
Well, I would think, first of all, I'd start with the Attorney General.
Now I understand she is one of the authorities that has to review it, but I think her review process is fairly limited, as I understand it, too. Is it going to be more monopolistic? by merging the two together. And I may be wrong, but that was my understanding, that she just can't take a look at saying, well, Highmark's going to get, they're not going to get the good service, and this one isn't, and that one isn't. My understanding is she's going to decide is it a monopoly or not.
From a business aspect only, and not the impact.
Well, I mean, that's what's causing this whole thing with Highmark. Highmark is saying that UPMC is too expensive. I mean, and they insure people throughout the Commonwealth. Actually, Highmark insures people outside of Pennsylvania too. And the reason they're focusing in on UPMC is because UPMC's almost a monopoly in the Pittsburgh area. And, you know, now they're going to be really a monopoly here in Altoona. Well, you know, and they're saying the prices are too high.
Well, the one point that I think was made, I've been to several meetings on this issue, and the one point was that UPMC is not a multi-state provider. They are strictly Pennsylvania. So if you would be traveling to Texas for a couple of weeks, like I do on occasion to see my grandkids, if something happens to be down there after this cutoff date, am I going to have to get out of network services down there, or am I going to get services at all? Because my understanding was UPMC is restricted to the state of Pennsylvania. And if that's the case...
Well, actually, I have UPMC Medicare Advantage. And in my situation, you have a number to call. If you're out of state and you have an emergency service, I believe
it has to be emergency,
I believe they say
that's
emergency service, then you call this number and they basically have a list of healthcare organizations wherever you are that you are allowed to go to and still have in-network charges. But I don't know, you know, every health insurance policy is different, so I don't actually know.
So, Tom?
Well, I was going to say, my Highmark book itself looks like an encyclopedia.
Oh, it's terrible.
If it's this situation, you go here. If it's this situation, you go here. And I chose Highmark not so much because I like them, it's because of the fact you can step out of Pennsylvania and have the same level of coverage.
Johns Hopkins wasn't out of network for me.
That's another thing, too. Well, I think that apparently, though, the decision is made, the merger is pending the Attorney General's final approval. It's a fait accompli. So the problem that we're going to have is trying to convince UPMC to provide to the Highmark folks unlimited or usual coverage beyond that cutoff date. And the only way we can do that, I would imagine, is to be calling our Altoona regional people and say, look, be firm at that table when you're negotiating, because you have a lot of people in Blair County who are Highmark.
There are.
Well, I think UPMC has already won, because when you are negotiating, the city's negotiating, and a lot of those city workers have Highmark. Well, when you're sitting there negotiating health care, I mean, and you know UPMC is going to be the only game in town, I mean, you're not going to probably consider Highmark anymore. So I think Highmark is already lost. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
but
we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens, because I know there's not much we can do about it right now. Let's move on to the state issues. The budget, I don't know if I happened to get on one of the nets this morning, and it was in the Altoona Mirror, I think, this morning. One of the senators, Sam Smith, the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania from Punxsutawney, said that he recommended to the governor that we're not even going to consider the pension fund reforms. So that's going to be off the table. I read also that the sale of the liquor store system to a private entity is in great jeopardy. What have you folks gotten any information on it? What is your take on the budget this year, Tom? Particularly with these two big issues, pension reform and the sale of the liquor store.
Well, the liquor stores, I mean, now, personally, I don't drink. So, to me, it's a moot point. But there's unanswered questions. You know, what's going to happen to the employees when they do sell them, if they sell them? You know, the private company, are they going to maintain the same salary and benefits? It's probably doubtful.
And how about a contract that says you have to have just cause to be disciplined and or let go? And if you don't have that kind of protection in a contract, you know, and if you're sold out, and I think that's a pretty standard rule in labor relations today. If a company buys you out, you know, they're not bound by, just like Valley View when it was sold, the new company coming in wasn't really truly legally bound until the end of the contract year. So with this whole thing with the liquor store people,
well, I think the whole debate has been somewhat dishonest. For example, the picture being put up in front of all the voters is, well, wouldn't it be nice to buy wine and beer at supermarkets?
Yeah.
Well, now, hey, I am a drinker, and I agree that would be convenient to go to a supermarket and be able to purchase that. But because I'm a drinker, I've actually paid a little bit of attention. This isn't a new issue. Every governor, it seems, this issue comes up. And the idea is that you're going to pay less for the product you purchase at, let's say, Sam's Club or Walmart, because you go to other states and they have a selection, limited, I might add, selection of different alcoholic beverages. And to me, actually, the prices are pretty similar to what they all are in Pennsylvania. So this idea of pricing, that it's going to be better, I don't accept, actually. And that's even more apparent when, Pennsylvania adds 18% onto every purchase you make.
Yeah.
And the other states don't necessarily have such a high tax. So you buy wine, you buy spirits in state stores, it's 18% markup for tax, then it's the 6% sales tax.
So that's
other states should be cheaper if everything's equal, but they're not, because the profit is higher for the commercial things. So I go along with the convenience argument, but by the way, it's also dishonest to say beer, because beer is not stolen by government employees.
That's right. It is not a controlled substance by the...
Yeah, it's a private license that beer distributors have, and they've paid a lot of money for the right to sell beer. And then the taverns also have a right to sell limited quantities of beer. It is a very confusing system.
Right. Well, this is where I think the transparency comes in. If they're going to privatize, then there ought to be public notification of, here's what we're going to try to do to protect the integrity of the employees. Is there some way, I don't think a law can force a company to recognize a union. That was not certified originally. So I don't think the state can say, because you had a union before, and if you're going to buy that company, you've got to accept the union. I don't think that's the law.
I don't think
so. I think the whole thing of transparency with the state is, if you're going to sell that business, make sure you tell us ahead of time before you make the final vote. So if we don't like it, we'll call our representatives and tell them to vote no.
Oh, well, the beer distributors have been vocal. In fact, they're instrumental in stopping this, I think.
Yeah.
By the way, I have a daughter who happens to work at a supermarket in the state of Washington. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the state of Washington had a similar system for alcohol up until about a year and a half ago, and they switched. And my daughter tells me that she works for Safeway out in the state of Washington, and they've had all sorts. Safeway has had a lot of trouble in trying to sell, and I guess they're selling spirits at Safeway along with the beer and wine, and they've had people just go take the spirits, go into the restroom, drink it. In other words, they've had a lot of the beer and wine seem to disappear, just walk out of the store. The monitoring is very difficult when you run a supermarket.
You could see the hue and cry if they had cameras in the bathroom to make sure you're not drinking the booze. But then what would that do to the privacy?
They pshaw and say that supermarkets can provide the same protection that liquor stores can. I don't agree.
That's not
no. It's just sort of think about the situation. It's obvious. And here in Pennsylvania, you have issues like they're talking supermarkets currently that have a food section that's allowed to sell beer.
Well, like Giant Eagle.
Yeah, right. But you have some of the rural areas of Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of rural areas. They don't have big supermarkets that are going to be able to put...
and what happens to a liquor store or a wine and spirit, they call it now, but let's say you go to Johnsonburg or you go to Dagus-Kahonda or someplace, where they now currently have a liquor license store. And what happens if some guy buys these licenses and he says, hey, I'm not making any money, we're going to close them. What are these poor drinkers going to do?
Happened in West Virginia. West Virginia 5
right.
years ago did the same thing, and the state of West Virginia was charging so much for the licenses that the people running shops that would sell it looked at the cost of the license and decided, hey, I'm not even going to buy a license because I can't make money. That was their analysis.
I think as we move on to the next topic, I think what we can say to the people who are watching, if you are concerned, like I say, I'm not a drinker myself either, but I am concerned that when government decides to privatize, I'm very distressed with our current governor, whose whole mantra was when he was elected, and he told people this time and time again, even when he tried to privatize the lottery system. He said, pick up the phone book and turn to the yellow pages, and if you see some company or some entity in that phone book that provides a service that government now does in some fashion, let me know and we'll privatize it. Now, to me, that's a tragedy when you start privatizing every single thing. That's the libertarian view.
Well, and I might add, our local representative has that viewpoint. Don't do any analysis. If it's government doing it, it's bad. John McGinnis.
Final word, Tom, on this one.
Well, I agree. If you look at liquor licenses, just even do any research at all, it's a mirror. There's no clear, concise path.
And we should demand information from Jerry Stern and from McGinnis and from John Eichelberger. What is happening? Give us the lineup on that. Okay, it's 9:28. We're going to take one break today, and we'll take it now. And then when we come back, we're going to take a look at the Pennsylvania pension dilemma, which of course is on hold right now, but I want to get your thoughts about how it should go, and is it fair to blame the people who are in the pension system for being the cause of it all? So let's take our first break and we'll come back.
Likely caused by type 2 diabetes and heart disease.
Still smoking?
Victims' lungs are black and scarred.
You can get a physical exam now, or you can get one later. Talk to your doctor about a physical. Learn how to lower your risk for type 2 diabetes and heart disease and live a healthier life.
We don't care if your graphics aren't flashy, or if your audio doesn't sound perfect, or if you're not the world's greatest camera person. We just want to see what you want us to see, and to know what you would like us to know. Your local public access television station has tools and resources to make this possible, so that we can see what you see. It's the freedom to communicate, and it's only on cable.
Let's put on hold now. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Plain speaking, and our panel, Tom Patterson, George Thompson, and Robin Aurandt, and I are now going to take a look at the pension plans in Pennsylvania. And I think we can all agree, but just by reading the news, and by the way, that's something people are doing less and less of today, reading the news. But nonetheless, maybe getting on the net, Pennsylvania is not the only state. There are many, many states that have been delinquent in their payments to retirement systems. And George pointed out very succinctly here recently that even the county commissioners in Blair County admitted that for the last 12 years that they have deliberately underfunded the pension fund for the Valley View home folks. And that's one of the reasons they're selling it. Well, there was the editor in the Altoona Mirror today challenging our county commissioners.
Oh, I didn't.
Well, you'd have to read that one. It's another interesting one, saying one thing and doing another thing. But the point is, where are we on this pension system? Because I know it's a tremendous burden, and it can be over the years. But what are there any answers that are going to be acceptable to everyone? Or, how are we going to get out of this mess? George, you want to start off?
I want to expand who's in trouble. I mean, private industry also has underfunded their pension systems. So this underfunding is pretty pervasive. I mean, it's like you point out, it's state, local governments, anyone who has a defined benefit program. And that seems to be one of the pivot points here on whether the state is going to provide a defined benefit program or a defined contribution program. And our local representative, John McGinnis, he keeps making these arguments that the state needs to set up basically 401ks.
Which are defined contribution plans.
Programs. In that situation, I guess the current legislation, already passed, I might add, for new Commonwealth workers, the state would, well, I'm not sure, new Commonwealth workers. Let's say it this way. The contribution rate is 4% that the employer, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or the school districts combine with the state. It's a 4% contribution under the 401k type of system. With the defined benefit, it's not that so much of the defined benefit programs are dependent on the investment returns found in the portfolio of the retirement fund. And for years, actually, the returns were quite adequate, 9–10%.
Yes.
And then we had the stock market collapse, back actually 2 of them, the big one being around 2007, 2008. And all of a sudden, these assumptions that the portfolio will grow 8% was what they were projecting, wasn't being met. And so immediately there's you follow these projections of a lower rate of return through, and you have these gigantic $1 billion deficits, underfunding.
Well, it goes even back farther than that, because during Tom Ridge's administration, the Republican governor, when he took office, the combined contribution rates for the school district and the local entity was 25%. By the time he left office, it was down to 0.09%. So all those years, and those are the years when the stock market was blossoming. But if you were forward thinking at the time, you should never have reduced the contribution rate 2,500%.
They did it on the premise that the stock market would always be up, and we know that, there's cycles.
Right, and not only did they reduce the contribution rate, but through the governor's intervention with the legislature, they increased the multiplier, and they reduced the number of years to vest.
Yeah.
And so that compounded the problem. So then the crash of the Wall Street was the big one then.
Yeah, and actually Governor Corbett's Office of the Budget has a nice report you can pull down, and it documents all of that. And they say this is happening, and it's not, the fault of the employees.
Yeah, and we're getting blamed.
The employees seem to be taking the hit on this thing when it's actually misguided policies that the administrations had, and it's not restricted to just Ridge's administration or Corbett's administration, who ironically is still underfunding the pension. Right now they're underfunding it, and Rendell's administration underfunded it. Everyone is afraid to increase the contribution to make the pension system adequate, because you either have to raise taxes to do it, or they have to figure out what programs to cut, and no one seems to be willing to do that.
Well, obviously it's not going to be done at least until after the summer break, because they're all going home Sunday or Saturday this week for a summer break. I don't know how long they take in the legislature, so we'll be able to revisit the pension thing. But I do think it's unfair that the employees are being blamed for the deficit, when indeed their rate, like for the teachers, their rate has been set by law.
And I might say right away that our local legislator, John McGinnis, I attended a meeting. He had a town hall meeting at the library a few weeks ago, and he's going around saying that people are getting $70,000 pensions. Well, that is just theoretically, you can get a $70,000 pension if you started early enough
and worked 50 years.
Got 35 years of service and had the highest salary that you could get. But the reality is, most people in the pension system, you can go on their website to look. $24,000 is the average pension for SERS. And the teachers aren't different. They're similar in pension. So You know, the people
They're
that are
deliberately
listening,
deliberately
of
misleading.
course. And then McGinnis is saying that the rate of return, right now they're projecting these deficits based on an assumed rate of return of 7.5%. And he's saying that's too high. Well, the thing is, I mean, if you look at the last few years, it may be too high, but if you look at the overall thing, over a longer period, it's actually about 10% is the rate of return, so it's too low. You can make the argument it's too low, but he's acting like he should assume 3% or something.
Well, they're being very disingenuous by, and I call it lying, and I don't care.
Once again, they're making things up. Reagan did it about the welfare queen in Chicago that made $150,000 a year and had 20 kids and 20 different names.
And IDs 29.
Yeah, and that was all made up.
We obviously will not get an answer to that for some time. Let's kick it up a notch here. Let's take a look at, as you well know, the Supreme Court was busy this week.
Very busy.
3 big decisions. Let's take a look at the first one. They actually, in the first decision of great monumental impact in this country, was the gutting of the voter ID law. And what's happening now, they are, in fact, they ruled that the provisions of that Voting Rights Act of 1965 is no longer in effect. And that means people like Texas, and they came out, Mississippi, South Carolina, and one other state said that they're going to begin today to implement the voter ID provision. Pennsylvania, of course, is not affected by that because we have a big hearing in the Commonwealth Court coming up next in July, I think it is, where they're going to discuss the unconstitutionality of it. But what is your take on the fact that they are now saying that states can set up their own systems of how people vote? Tom?
Well, I was surprised when I looked at the map to see Alaska and South Dakota. They were 2 of the ones that surprised me. Mm-hmm. You know. Most of them, if you look at it, it's all down through the southern states. But I just can't understand what the problem was to begin with. And I know there was a local letter to the editor recently that somebody stated about he knows there's a majority of fraud. Well, there is none.
In fact, when this former Attorney General for Pennsylvania, a woman, I forget her name, when she testified before the Commonwealth Court last year, under oath, she testified that the state of Pennsylvania has not one single example of voter fraud that has been reported and authenticated. I mean, that's the Attorney General saying that. Mm-hmm. So anybody who says
that it's prevalent,
is making stuff up. They are
again.
Lying.
They're making stuff up.
In fact, the complaints were more of voters being harassed.
Yeah.
By
we had
people.
Some of that. We had some of that here. I had reports in our office. I still say, and this has been a common charge lately, that in every single state that these laws are being presented are totally controlled by the Republican legislature and governor.
They gerrymandered their way into a House majority. They're
Senate, House,
and
governor.
now disenfranchising basically people of color,
Democrats,
and poor from the ballot box.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it several times. The issue in Pennsylvania is that people don't vote.
That's right.
I mean, and now they're trying to make things difficult for people that don't have driver's license, which is a lot of people.
Yeah, in the cities, you rely on mass transit, so you're not always going to have a driver's license.
And you know, it's not easy to get this photo ID from PennDOT. You need to produce a birth certificate, which sounds easy, but first of all, costs you money. If you're born out of state, you have to go.
Well, the state was going to absorb that cost.
The state of Pennsylvania was, but if you were born out of state, you got to pay that other state. Yeah. And there's numerous documented proof that people can't obtain their birth certificates for reasons I don't know why. They go to get their birth certificate, let's say in South Carolina, and South Carolina would say, well, we don't have a record of your birth. But the person they're talking about was born in South Carolina, moved to Pennsylvania, voted for years. I mean, you know, it's not a ghost we're talking about, it's a real live person. And the lawsuit that has been filed documents person after person that has that happen to them. And so this idea that you said, Frank, that there is no identifiable voter fraud or anything is counterbalanced by all sorts of documentation of people that are going to be unable to vote because they lack documentation through no fault of their own.
That's right.
And we just assume everything works perfect.
Yeah.
And see, that's only part of it, because what they're doing in some of the states, excuse me, is they're cutting the number of days in which you can vote. Some states have multiple, and some of them can vote on Sundays and so on. A lot of these southern states are cutting back that whole idea of when you can vote. And it is, again, specifically designed to restrict the voting rights of certain people. And we all know who those certain
Service
people are.
people work 15, 16 hours a day. You know, when can they vote?
Well, yeah, Pennsylvania, it makes it very difficult to vote absentee.
Yeah,
I mean, other states, some states routinely mail the absentee ballots out to people, encouraging them to vote absentee, and they view it as more effective because then they don't have to worry about this rush of people in this 12-hour period during Tuesday. I mean, why have it on Tuesday even is an issue. Why not have it on 2 days, for example?
Well, that's the whole point.
So Pennsylvania is actually one of the states that makes it rough for anyone to vote. I'm
We're
not
still
saying
in the dark ages on that
Draconian.
Draconian, yeah. And I don't know what the answer is going to be. Of course, that's going to embolden the legislature in Pennsylvania now, because the thing that is so mind-boggling in Pennsylvania, we have 1.25 million more Democrats registered than Republicans. And look at our legislature, our governor.
Yeah, I mean, there's things we haven't talked
we haven't
about
voted
here. The consequence of that is this Obamacare, Medicaid expansion. One of my pet peeves, and I just saw that the Republican legislature said, do not try to fund that Medicaid, we will vote against it. And the irony is, not only would you cover about 500,000 Pennsylvanians in health care, but it saves Pennsylvania money. It saves, by their own report, it saves about $400 million to accept Obamacare, because it's 100% funded the first year, and then even when it's 90% funded in subsequent, after the first 3 years, it still saves money, and there's a variety of reasons it does. Part of the big reason is because Pennsylvania already pays for a lot of this health care stuff, except they pay it out of 100% Pennsylvania money. So
this way it's coming from the government, and free. They're going to give them the first 3 years free.
So this is totally ideological. I mean, it has no basis on anything that's rational. This declining to accept Medicaid money. I'm furious. I have to say, I've never seen such disrespect for Pennsylvania poor people, and a lot of the people that are being affected here work. Yeah. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. These people all work and their employers don't provide health care, or they provide insurance that is inadequate for their needs. These are the people that would be covered. And Pennsylvania Republican legislators are like slapping the face of 500,000 Pennsylvanians to the detriment of their own budget.
Yeah. Well, it's strictly political.
No, I just wanted to add, my wife, where she works, she's one of a handful of employees left that her employer provides insurance for. They stopped providing insurance coverage a long time ago. Yeah. And they keep telling her every year, look for the day to come when we don't provide it for you.
And that's the tragedy. It would be different, like you said, if it was a cost factor. But it is not. It goes back to this partisan bickering. The Republican legislators are just doing it to slam the Democrats and put them in their place, and they're doing it because they are opposed to that president we have, and they should have taken his name off the bill and called it Thompson care or something, and we wouldn't have had that same kind of
And the irony is that much of the Affordable Health Care Act comes from Republicans.
Yeah,
it's a lot of their
this
ideas.
is their original.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're complaining about an 800-page bill that no one ever read. Well, the reason it's 800 pages is because of the Republicans trying to avoid providing health care for people. Now, I would have had a simple health care, put everyone under Medicare, and
Absolutely.
it wouldn't have been nearly 800 pages to say that.
Yeah. That's what Japan does. They have Medicare for all.
Well, that's what most countries do. They have, and it's not that the government provides the service. This idea that the government was going to provide the service, false.
Yeah.
Current Medicare, nothing to do with the government providing the service. You go to your private health care provider, whoever you want.
It's maddening.
It's so dishonest, the conversations, and it's funded, by the way, by all these ads, by people. You have no idea who's behind them. In the case of the public information on Obamacare, about $450 million has been spent disseminating this information. Out of that $450 million, $400 million of it has been by people opposed to Obamacare. And so you have all these negative ideas about what's happening there.
They'll pay for abortion on demand.
Total dishonest misinformation. And what's frustrating for someone like me, and I do spend a lot of time researching things, and I realize that most people can't afford to do that. I'm retired. But what's so maddening for me is the very people that these things would benefit either don't vote or they vote Republican.
Yeah. And they don't understand.
They don't seem to get it. They don't seem to get it. Maybe someone will start figuring it out.
Well, I was going to say, I watched part of the PCN debates on the Medicaid.
George would love you for that.
I watched. And, if you pay any attention to politics beyond that point, like one of my favorite persons, which on Lang Broadband we no longer get, is the Tom Hartman show. I like
Tom Hartman. He's good, yeah.
And they had Jonathan Ingram on. He was one of the ones that testified. And, if you listen to the man on the other side of the table, the man's arrogant. He's arrogant, and he's
ignorant.
He's 100%. If the government funds it, it's wrong. And he had facts and figures about different states. Well, one of the congressmen called him out. She said, "You're telling me about you have data that goes back." And she said, "Well, wait." She said, "They just implemented this 2 days ago." And he kept saying about figures that they figured it was going to be so many thousands of this certain state's residents, and they wound up 300,000.
Well, what's the old saying? Figures lie and liars figure.
That's a good one.
But the whole point is, it's misinformation, and that's why I will have to get serious about my book. I'm writing a book someday, and the title is Ignorance is a Choice. Because people don't want to know the facts, because if they do,
then they
have to change their minds.
They have to change.
Well, Obamacare was a bad PR campaign to begin with. You had Michelle Bachmann and the death panels, Sarah Palin. We were turned into a draconian society where you walked out onto the tundra and died after a certain age.
How about Nancy Pelosi's response to Michelle Bachmann on this thing with the same-sex decision? She got on and talked about marriage was created by God and all of this stuff, going on and on and on. And Nancy Pelosi was asked, "Well, what's your reaction to what Michelle Bachmann said?" She said, "Who cares?" Who cares?
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on...
Well, we were doing the state.
Yeah, we were doing the state. Now we've kind of segued into what we did go into the voter ID.
Apparently, the lottery is done for the. I don't know. You don't hear anyone talking about the lottery anymore. That's another privatization.
Yeah, see, that's another thing. And he proudly said that he was going to privatize that as part of his initiative. But yet, thank God for Kathleen Kane. She ruled that unconstitutional and is not going to go private. At this point.
So I guess not.
It's in limbo.
I was going to say they're in the locker room regrouping is what they're doing.
Yeah, regrouping. That's right. Well, let's take a look at the national just as quickly as we can. I know we're running out of time. There were several things that happened, of course. The Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage benefits were available to all those who, in the states that have it. And in California, they said they would not, not once in either court decision did they bring up the topic same-sex marriage. They said in the California Proposition 8 case that the person who filed the complaint and the challenge to the law didn't have any standing.
Yeah,
so they said,
private.
right, it was a private individual. So their ruling was that the whole process, they didn't even know why it got to the Supreme Court, other than they figured they would negate it. So now Proposition 8, which was declared unconstitutional by a federal district judge in California and sustained by the Ninth Circuit Court. So in other words, it is now another state that has same-sex marriage. What kind of impact do we as a panel think this is going to have on Pennsylvania and other states that are not currently involved in same-sex marriage issues? Robin?
Wow. I don't know. I wouldn't expect that Pennsylvania would be, the legislature is so broken, I can't imagine that they would forward the agenda of agreeing with the Supreme Court.
Tom?
Yeah, I was going to say, they're on today's...
I don't think we have... I think it's basically going to be a moot point.
PA Online, it says U.S. court ruling won't change PA gay marriage ban.
Yeah,
and
it's not.
There are it says three Democrats who are lining up to challenge Corbett in 2014 hailed the Supreme Court decision, raising the possibility that gay marriage could emerge as a campaign issue. And candidate Tom Wolf, John Hanger, and they said that Pennsylvania much past marriage equality, said candidate Tom Wolf, a former Rendell administrator. Official who owns building materials supplier in New York said in a statement, this time we had equal rights under the law.
Well, that's the whole issue, I think, basically, and I think the Supreme Court said that in the benefit decision. In fact, John Roberts wrote the major the decision in the benefits case, where he said that equal protection under the law means equal protection under the law. Whereas Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion on the
Prop 8.
Prop 8. Do I have that right? Was it? Anyway, Justice Roberts wrote one of the opinions. I forget which one. George, what's your take on that? Do you think there's going to be any demonstrative change in legislators over the next, say, 10 years in trying to broaden?
Well, our current legislators, for example, Senator Eichelberger, he wants to push a constitutional amendment defining marriage as between a man and a woman. So I'm not sure he's ever going to change that opinion. Yeah. The only way to change that is to not elect him. I mean, the issue of the public perception of gay rights has really been transforming. There's various public opinion polls that the majority of the population actually has grown very accepting, the majority accepting of the rights of gays to marry. As far as some medical things, like at one point being homosexual was viewed as a psychiatric disorder, actually, and you could go, and I think your health insurance would pay to change you back to a
they were paying for those psychological.
That was eliminated as a psychiatric disorder.
And the counseling, whatever that groomed them to back into the heterosexual lifestyle.
Well, that Exodus company,
abject failure.
Wasn't that Exodus company down in Florida, the big one?
Right. They
and the guy came out and he apologized for their misguided attempts.
It really needs to ask the question: why would anyone choose to be homosexual?
I know. When
mean,
you're
all
getting
of
ostracized by society,
sure,
more than likely your family's going to be upset. So, I mean, you have, and then you're discriminated in the workforce. So, I mean,
you're beaten up if you're the wrong, in the wrong crowd. There's all sorts of reasons why you would never choose to be homosexual. This idea that it's a moral choice, and the Catholic Church, by the way, yesterday came out against this thing, and they said it's going to be detrimental for children. which
is
in my mind
there
makes
is
no sense. I've seen a
Why don't
lot
they-
of
why don't-
dissfunctional heterosexual
That's right. Why don't these
relationships
churches attack
screwing
the
up kids?
Yes,
You
the
know,
adulterers and the child molesters and the divorced parents and everything. You can't tell me that everything is hunky dory in any of
In
these
the
churches just
heterosexual
because
I
they
mean,
say it is.
I mean, to me, and well, in a program I watched on public access, apparently one of the religious writings says just execute the homosexual. I mean, there's some nasty thought out there.
What-
Well, and look at Wellsboro Church, where they come and
Denigrate people.
yeah, well, and protest military funerals because of homosexuality.
Yeah, saying God. Why don't people understand this is not a theocracy? We're in a democracy, which the Constitution specifically states there shall be a clear delineation between church and state. There is nothing. The Bible is not incorporated in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I mean, it is by extension of people who are zealous in their causes that they try to impose on the secular government religious ideologies. And that is not what this government... The people who came to America escaped theocratic oppression. So why do they want to reinstitute it here in America?
No, they don't view it that way.
They don't.
They view it as they're following the will of God.
See, that's why ignorance is a choice.
Well, you know, that's the way they view it, and I just reject that
I do too.
simplified argument. If you actually read the Bible, there's all sorts of things that they used
if
to
they do that.
penalties.
Boy, some of these people who are espousing it, they would have their heads cut off in a minute.
It's
Or
public,
limbs.
It's public perception. You know, if you show same-sex couples in a stable relationship with a family and a decent job, it wouldn't make the news. Nobody would watch it.
Yeah.
It's better to look at, for some reason, society looks at the
Dysfunction.
bad in people.
Yeah.
That's what
They
sells.
celebrate
News.
dysfunction.
We focus on the negativity, and that's why I think with the Democratic Party is so much farther ahead ideologically. We care for people. We don't denigrate. We don't try to diminish. We try to expand services to those who, for whatever reason, can't fend for themselves. And that's our basic concept. We're not going out seeking legislation to cut benefits for food stamp people and stuff like that, which, by the way...
Speaking of the Farm Bill.
Yes, the Farm Bill.
It was a Republican bill,
I think
and
we're
they
down to
voted
about
it
3
down.
minutes, and the Farm Bill alone, I mean...
They can't even, there's so much dysfunction in that party, they can't even, they make the legislation and they can't even get it passed.
Yeah, what a tremendous kick in the butt that was for Boehner. 62 of his own people voted against the bill. I mean,
John Boehner wants to be somebody. He doesn't, he wants to be Speaker of the House. He doesn't want to do anything, accomplish anything. He wants to be somebody. And when you have a person in power like that, it's not,
But
we're reaping the
results. You know, the thing about it is he's held hostage by these zealots, the no taxing people,
The Tea Party.
Tea Party people.
Yeah.
When in reality, people have to understand the only form of revenue that government has is tax. And if you don't want services, if you don't want police protection, fire protection, roads, schools, then vote no.
Yeah.
But where are we going to go? Is our democracy that's in trouble as bad as anarchy? You know, we've got to get together and say, we've got to protect the integrity of our government.
And what people don't realize is if you would do away with the tax base or whatever, rich people would be okay.
Yeah.
It's us that wouldn't.
I mean, it's terrible that the average American's income is diminishing through cost of living because their raises and everything haven't been the same. Well, we're down to the end, and folks, we're going to be back in a couple of weeks, and we welcome Tom as a guest, and I'm sure he'll have a chance to really feel his oats one of these days. But I appreciate the panel's input, and again, George has so much information. Take me a week to try to keep up with him. But at least we're trying to bring to your attention, folks, the issues that mean something, and the Democratic Party cares for you much, much more than the other party does, because we're not supporting bills that are detrimental to your health, safety, and welfare. Vote Democrat, and for the democratic principles, because we care for you. Thanks, panel. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.